Welcome to the Irish Farmers Journal Weekly Podcast, brought to you by Ornua, the home of Irish dairy.
Hello, Patrick Dunno here, news editor with the Irish Farmers Journal, and I'm joined by Phelim O'Neill, the market specialist. Phelim, you're covering a very interesting story this week in relation to the beef grid. Michael Drennan, one of the architects of the current grid, has called for a redesign of the grid. Can you tell us more about that?
I'm not sure that I would say it's a redesign of the grid. It's more a modification of the existing grid that has been in place now for a few years, and I think would be considered to have served the industry reasonably well over that period.
Overall, explain to everybody, what is the grid?
The grid is basically the payment structure for cattle, for beef cattle at the abattoir. I suppose historically cattle would have been bought more or less on a flat rate system where all the animals, the good ones and the less ones, would have got paid at the same value irrespective of the meat yield and the meat value that the factory was able to realise from that. And it was a case of really the good compensated the bad, one compensated for the other.
How long has it been in place, and why is there a grid?
There was a general consensus in the industry a few years ago when this was put in place. As you referred to, Teagasc at the time would have had a key role in developing this, but it was negotiated primarily between the meat plant representatives and the farmer representatives. And the reason was there was a general consensus, and I think it's one that we would all agree with in the industry, that payment for cattle on a flat rate structure, whilst it might have an attraction in its simplicity, it doesn't send the proper market signals to the farmers that are producing those cattle. The farmer that's producing the really good and the really suitable beef animal that fits all markets in terms of size and shape should be correctly rewarded at a higher value than the animal that doesn't. The old system basically didn't do that. The grid was an attempt to establish that principle.
Why change it then, or why suggest changes when farmers and factories seem to be happy with it for the most part?
That's true. The only approach that we have had on this subject has been from, as you say, one of the original architects of it. None of the other parties have raised the subject with us. We will be looking for comment from the representatives of the meat factories and the farming representatives. This reason that it would be suitable to modify it or look at it, modification of it now, is whenever the grid was originally put in place, beef was in or around €3 per kilo. It is now trading in or around €4 per kilo. So with that increase in carcass value, the proportion that is paid in terms of the differential between the grades hasn't increased to reflect that. So the suggestion is that the variation should move from 18 to 24 cent per kilo.
If this differential was to increase, as you say, and as Michael Drennan suggests in his report to us, that it was to increase from 18 cent to 24 cent per kilo, does that mean that all farmers will get more money?
No, that would be an oversimplification, and we wish in life that it could be that easy. The reality of life is the pool of money that's available for purchase of cattle will remain consistent and will remain the same. It is really just the distribution of that pool of money that we're talking about here. So in the event that you put more money or more value into the higher grade animals, the reality of life is that there will be less money then available in the lower grade. So it's important here to talk, and I suppose something we talk sometimes about a premium when we in fact mean a differential between the amount paid for the higher spec, the higher grade animal, than the lower grade one. So in terms of the cost implications or the reward or benefit implications for farmers, I would envisage that if there was to be any industry consensus on making a modification, it would have to be cost neutral.
When you look at paid out at a cent per kilo basis, is that perhaps too simplistic? Should it be, if there's a possibility of redrawing the whole thing, should it be based on a percentage cut or percentage improvement there, that it'd be more fitting in an overall sense rather than on a kind of basic cent per kilo basis?
In a country that kills roughly 1.5 million cattle every year, spread across 70-odd thousand beef farmers, the trade-off has to be between trying to have something in place that's reasonably straightforward, simple and understood and general, and at the other extreme going to the last degree to reward the highest spec animal with an even higher price. You could have a multi-point grid, you could have all sorts of combinations for animals that do other weight wonderful things, and there are examples of it. The Angus scheme, the Hereford schemes are good examples of how premium are paid over and above the existing structures, and indeed how that premium varies depending on the supply of cattle that are available at different times of the year. So I think in terms of having payment points that properly reflect the value of cattle, I think we always have to try and keep in mind we have moved with the present grid system quite a long way, in fact, from basically, as I said, an industry structure where it was flat payment all the way to one where you have this degree of market signal that is sent back through the line. You could take that much further if you got into a stage of measuring the muscle component and the loin size of cattle, etc., etc. You could develop a very complex system that wouldn't be done on grade bands or anything like that. You could do it in individual carcasses. But in truth, I think we're still some way off from that point.
And finally, you say Michael is probably the only person that has raised his head on the issue, and that for the most part other stakeholders are happy. Why would there be opposition to Michael's fairly, contentious proposals?
I wasn't around at the time whenever the original grid was put in place, but my understanding is that was quite a tough negotiation, and it was quite difficult to achieve the consensus that was needed to have a general system in place. And it could well be that there might be a reluctance in some in the industry to reopen what was a difficult topic at the time when there isn't any widespread industry pressure to do so.
Philip, thank you very much.
You're listening to the Irish Farmers Journal podcast, brought to you by Ornua, the home of Irish dairy.
Staying with beef farming, the Irish Farmers Journal correspondent in the North, Peter McCann, attended a farm walk organised by the Northern Ireland Suckler Beef Programme last week. He talked to the host Declan Rafferty and his advisor Brian Hawthorne about the lessons learned from Declan's progress in terms of calving patterns and reseeding.
Declan is a member of the Northern Ireland Suckler Beef Programme and farms along with his neighbour Aidan Quinn. There's an open day here today, and Declan, can you just run me through some of the farm facts and the background to your farm here?
We farm 69 hectares, 69 improved hectares on 9 rough grazing. We have 6 land blocks, all owned, no conacre. In 2014 with a stocking rate of 1.46 equivalents per hectare.
And that was 2014, Declan, you joined the scheme?
Yeah, we joined the scheme in 2014. And we have presently 60 suckler cows, mainly Simmental Limousin cross. Replacements are all purchased. We were purchased prior to this. Now we've been home bred. With a calving spread of 11 months when we joined the programme. And we'd have either sold weanlings, we'd have red stores, we'd have finished bulls, we'd have steer beef. We tried everything prior to joining the programme.
You said you've mainly Simmental breeding cattle. What type of breeding are you working with now?
Well, we've introduced this spring stabiliser bull to the herd. We've used him on our Simmental and Limousin cross heifers. Last spring we bought a new Limousin bull, Ollie Kelly Iggy, and he was for docility and high milk value and temperament, so that's what we're going towards.
And is docility a big factor when selecting even replacement heifers, or what are you looking for in your heifers?
Docility is the main factor. We're looking at heifers that we get easy handled and easy calved and easy to work with. Because that's what we're trying to do. We're moving them every day. We want to be fit to handle them as easy without any stress.
And I see in your cows here, you're calving, and although you say whenever you began was 11-month calving, well, you decided to have a spring calving batch and an autumn calving. Why did you go for that and not say all spring?
Well, all spring we found that there was too much pressure on facilities. First of all, if we went calve the 90 cows over the spring, it would just be too much work. The 30 suckler cows in the autumn seems to work well for cash flow. We have more time with them 30 cows and to manage them and look after them. And that time of year, days are longer. We've more time, more time on our hands to be fit to look after them. And I think that seems to work well.
Going forward, you're in the programme and you've seen benefits so far. Are you there yet, or is there more to do, or what's your future targets?
It's very much a work in progress. There's a lot to do yet. We've only just taken a very small, tiny step. We were probably the worst positioned farmers to join this new group. We had a lot of work to do. We had to get the calving pattern tightened up to try and get to the gross margin of at least £750 a hectare. We're learning something from all the farmers that we're out with. From joining the group, we found that they've taken us round and showed us, that give us good advice, just only taking very small steps, as in agriculture things move very slowly.
Thank you very much. I'm joined now by Brian Hawthorne, a local caffrey advisor to Declan and Aidan. Brian is based in Dungannon. Today he's doing a talk on reseeding options for farmers this autumn. Brian, can you just talk me through what are the options for farmers if they're looking to reseed or improve their grassland?
Well, first of all, the first option obviously is conventional reseeding, where the farmer will drop the plough and do cultivation work after that and put his grass seed in. It's fairly traditional. A lot of farmers now are finding with some of the contractors are coming in, they're playing very deep, and maybe some of their land isn't suitable for playing deep, maybe playing up till. So what some guys are actually doing is they're actually just spraying it off with glyphosate and going in with the likes of power harrow and then putting in grass seed after that at the full around 14 kilos to the acre. On Declan and Aidan's farm here, they've been fairly novel in what they've been doing. They've been overseeding a fair bit, which is stitching in grass into existing swards, and they've done this with an earth engineering machine. It's really a modification, I suppose, of a direct drill. Seeds probably going in at around 8 to 10 kilos to the acre. It means they haven't got loss of production going into the autumn, and it's going to be in a good state then for next year going on. It's a good time of year to do overseeding now, getting into the autumn, because the grasses that are in the sward already are starting to slow down, and it means then that the other new grasses can compete better. It's generally a bad idea to go in too early in the spring overseeding. The existing grasses are growing very strongly, and it will affect your germination rates, and it can be harder to make it work.
And Brian, as far as then for men that they're looking to do a complete reseed, conventional plough that are spraying off a paddock, what is the best management for that, for spraying say Roundup, and how do they proceed with that?
Yeah, very reasonably simple. You know what I mean? You go to spray off a Roundup or glyphosate, whatever you want to call it. It's going to take, after you spray it, it's going to really take a fortnight to really before it starts to die off. Leave it for a fortnight after it's sprayed, then go in with a plough, and then a couple of runs with power harrows. Some people choose to do a bit of land levelling, and then in with the seed drill after that. Bad idea really to go in with someone like a big peg harrow after the grass seed's sown to try and to cover the grass seed. It means if you're sowing clover, the clover can end up going in very, very deep, and it will never germinate because it's just a small seed.
What about that lime?
Yeah.
Is that a good following at any point? Or
yes, I should have mentioned, sorry, before any reseed's done, even before you go to plough the field, good idea to get full soil analysis done, which will give you how much lime the field will need and your P and K levels, so you can balance up the correct amount of lime and phosphorus and potash.
And when is the best time to apply lime when you're reseeding?
A lot of the farmers would actually choose to put it on once the field. My advice would be don't plough the lime down. Put it on top of the ploughed ground if you can, providing it's not going to be very, very wet when you're doing it.
That's grand, Brian. Thanks very much.
We hope that you're enjoying this Irish Farmers Journal podcast, brought to you by Ornua, the home of Irish dairy. Find out more at farmersjournal.ie.
Now, I'm sure you watch the farming weather forecast as religiously as I do each Sunday on RTE1. My colleague Amy Fitzgibbon talked to Gerry Murphy, one of the meteorologists who presents the forecast, and she asked him how the programme started.
There was a meteorologist called Tom Keane in Mahern who was in charge of agro-meteorology, and he's actually, do you remember the broadcaster Sheena Keane? She did the afternoon show a few years ago there. Yeah. I don't know if you know. Well, that's her dad. Okay. But he was in Mahern, and he set up an AgMet group, which was basically a group of people from the universities, from Teagasc or on First Tulunta, as it was called then. Everyone involved with agriculture where meteorology would be relevant. And there was also people from RTE on that group. There was a guy called Joe Murray, I think he was in charge of graphics at one stage. And then during the 80s as well, the BBC started up a farming forecast. And one of this AgMet group came up with a report around 1985 as to various things that would be beneficial for farming in relation to weather. And one of the recommendations was a farming forecast on the TV. And it turned out that in the end it was developed and went on air we estimate, I haven't got an exact time, but our best estimate is in the spring of 1991.
So would the IFA been involved?
Yes, the IFA were involved as well. They would have had a representative. They would have had a representative on the AgMet group as well, yes. At the time, it was becoming impossible at that stage because the accuracy of weather forecasts has been improving gradually. You improve the forecast by 1 day per decade. Okay, so that means that's about 2 decades and a half, which means at this point you'd be getting more accurate further out for about 2.5, 3 days. So it became possible around that time to give a forecast for a longer period ahead, and the forecast was given then for a week ahead. Now it's still given for a week ahead now, but with improvements in technology, computers, models, etc., we would think that in many situations the forecast further on in the week would be more accurate now than it was then.
And what do you think of the Irish summer so far? Did that kind of fit in with predictions that you had? I know you probably couldn't say that you would have that, but
no, you can't predict that far ahead. You really only predict about a week to 10 days ahead.
Why do you think July was July was very bad in a lot of the parts of the country, wasn't it? It was the coldest in Mayo for 50 years.
Yeah, it was a very cool July. It just so happened that there is this thing called the jet stream, which is an upper air an upper air jet of wind. It's winds in the upper atmosphere, and they occur along what's called the polar front, which is the boundary between the cold air to the north and the warm air to the south. And the path of that jet stream and the track it takes, basically, it's the driver of these depressions across the Atlantic. And its path over this summer has been such that it has maintained a steady sort of westerly, west to east path, where to the south of it there was very, very hot weather over much of the southern half of Europe, but for ourselves in northwest Europe it remained quite cool. And that's the way it has been in general through the summer. Then that's just the way it goes. Like, remember that the past 2 summers were very warm summers, and having said that, some of the previous summers, 2008, 2009, I think 2012, so they were very wet summers. So the Irish weather is very variable, and the variability in the Irish climate is a good thing in many ways, because we don't get extremes. We don't get extreme cold very often, and we don't get extreme hot very often. But therefore, fluctuating within those extremes then in our maritime sort of temperate climate, it means that we can get a great variety in our weather from one summer to the next.
Yeah, so there's no way of predicting, I mean, next summer,
no,
that's way too far ahead.
No.
And obviously the west usually gets a lot more rain than the east.
Yes, it does. The west gets a lot more rain than the east. We have a predominantly westerly flow, which means that the bulk of our weather systems come in from the west, and when they're coming in off the sea, there's a high moisture content, and they deposit most of the rain then in the west as they move across the country, with less rain then further east.
Lucky southeast.
Well, the sunny southeast in terms of sunshine. Yeah. But having said that, South Dublin is the driest part of the country, and I think the one with the lowest rainfall is actually in Irishtown. In relation to the farming forecast itself, the thrust of the farming forecast is, on the TV, it's a 3-minute forecast. It's longer than the other forecasts. The main thing, of course, is the weather for the week ahead. That's by far the most important thing. Yeah. And for Irish farmers, very often the most important thing there is, depending on the time of year, but very often is rainfall, especially during the summer and autumn months when they're cutting silage, hay, or harvesting cereal crops. When is it going to rain, when it's not going to rain, it's all very important. So we're very cognizant of that. Then there are other parameters as well. The temperature, especially the soil temperature, that's very important, especially in the spring, as to when the grass growing season is going to begin, or when the soil temperature is going to be at a certain value whereby farmers can possibly consider planting certain crops, etc. And very important for letting cattle out on grass after wintering, because they want to know that there's a significant grass growth, and as well as that, very important for the sowing of fertilizer, as basically the fertilizer is only useful when it's responding to when the grass is responding to it. In other words, when there is potential for growth. So the soil temperature can be very important in the spring, in the early spring. The rainfall is always important, and they're the most important parameters. Then we also give information on the soil moisture deficits, which basically are to do with the amount of moisture in the soil. And this can be just a useful indicator for farmers as to what the general moisture content is in the soil, and the predictive as to what holds in store. But farmers can generally themselves read into that for their own soils based on the rainfall predictions anyway. 3 minutes isn't actually all that long to explain the whole weather for the whole week, really, when you narrow it down. And so consequently you are giving a broad brush of the whole week, but you try to make sure that the significant weather systems are flagged, and significant events, wind, rain, etc. Wind is also important in relation to spraying of crops. If there's too much wind, it's detrimental to spraying, so farmers are cognizant of wind as well. And then as well as that, during the summer months, we're also very aware of blight, which is a combination of rainfall, humidity and temperature. So when we have situations where we're expecting what we call the warm sector, when we're very mild, humid air, and some rainfall as well, that has great potential for blight.
And does it come in from weather stations around the country?
Well, all the weather information is continually coming in from the weather stations around the country. We also then, every week, read the Farmer's Journal, actually, to make sure we get a copy of the Farmer's Journal, and we read the section on the sort of the farm management aspect of it, where on relation to tillage, beef, etc., so that we're all the time up to date on what's relevant and what's a priority for farmers at that time. There's no point in talking about sowing when they're not sowing, if you know what I mean. You know.
And actually, when I'm doing the weather forecast for the website, I put in those details. I link to the management notes for each week. So, you know, So with the weekend weather, I would link into that. So it's very important. And so do you get much feedback, Gerry, on the forecast from farmers?
We just get general feedback. We go down to the ploughing championships every year and we speak to farmers, and they're mostly happy. But I think farmers are among the better educated with regard to the weather, in the sense that farmers are always very much in tune with the weather, and the forecast is very important to them, and they have a good handle on what's possible and what's not. I do think, and I would like to think, that farmers realise that the forecast is a best scientific opinion of what's going to happen. It's not a scientific fact.
Can I just ask you about your own background then finally, Gerry? So you're from a farming background yourself, are you?
Yes, I'm from a small farm in County Monaghan.
And how did you get into meteorology?
I got into meteorology because at school I was very interested in science, and I studied, I did science subjects for my Leaving Cert. I then studied science in UCD, and I gravitated towards physics. I have an honours degree in experimental physics, and in the 90s when I was looking for opportunities, the post of meteorologist in Mayherne was advertised, and for that you need a degree in physics or a degree in maths. And I was lucky enough to have the degree in physics and was fortunate enough to get the job. So when I got the job with my degree, then I was trained specifically in meteorology. So I came to meteorology through my background in physics.
Okay, and then how long have you been actually presenting on air?
I've been presenting the weather on the TV since 2001, late 2001.
Well, thank you very much for speaking to me, Gerry.
The Irish Farmers Journal Weekly Podcast, brought to you by Ornua, the home of Irish dairy.
Finally, let's turn to the Irish Country Living Desk for an update on the home renovation grant. There are thousands of euro available in tax credit if you make improvements to your house, but very few rural families have used the scheme so far. Consumer editor Ciara Leahy and journalist Roisin Healy have the details.
The Home Renovation Incentive Scheme, we only have 18 more weeks to Christmas. Now, Irish Country Living hasn't quite started present shopping yet, but we are writing about this Christmas deadline, obviously because it's work that's going to happen on your house and it's not something that you do, overnight or whatever. Basically, this was a scheme that was introduced in 2013 to incentivise contractors to register with the revenue. The benefit for homeowners is that by using a certified contractor, you can claim tax relief on works carried out in your home. And I mean, the savings are substantial enough. Anything between 595 and 4,400 euros is what you could save if you're upgrading your house.
So how successful has the scheme been?
Nearly 35 million euros has been received in tax credit by consumers nationwide. I mean, it's considered to be a very successful scheme. The massive problem, though, is that many farmers and rural families haven't benefited, not nearly as much as their urban counterparts. So if we look at the figures, a total of 24,495 properties in the country have registered. So 24,500 nearly. Out of that, there has been 11,633 in Dublin. 11,000. Compare that to Longford, where there's just 82. And I mean, these figures are really small in other counties as well. Monaghan has 91, Leitrim 94, Laois 140. I mean, they're really small figures compared to what's happening in Dublin. Now, obviously, there's a very high population in Dublin and we have to account for that. But if you're just to look at Dublin, Meath, Kildare and Wicklow, Dublin and surrounding counties, it's accounting for 60% of the works carried out under the scheme. That's just 4 counties accounting for 60% of the works.
Okay, so this isn't helpful for many rural residents, but what has been done for them to benefit?
Okay, so I talked to the Hardware Association of Ireland about this, and they're calling for 3 things to happen. The first is to have the scheme extended, and for the government to recognise that, look, the merchants and suppliers are only beginning to see an increase in activity after years of struggling following the construction industry collapse. Urban areas have led the trend out of the recession, but rural areas still have to catch up. And I mean, the figures here about the Home Renovation Incentive Scheme have shown that. Another thing that they're calling for is the change in the numbers. So currently the minimum you need to spend to avail of the scheme is 5,000 euros before you can benefit from the tax credit. In the future, they're suggesting that the minimum spend should reduce to 3,000 euros. And I mean, this could really benefit those in rural Ireland where contractor fees may not be as high on prices charged. So, if you were getting, jobs done such as, upgrading the windows or a small extension or something like that you'd be able to avail of it even if you're only spending 3,000 euros. They're also suggesting that that it's not just the minimum amount is reduced, but actually the maximum amount is increased as well, from €30,000, which is the maximum you can claim tax credits on, to €36,000. And the other thing they're calling for is that the tax credits are spread out over a year instead of 2 years. So currently at the moment, right, if you get works done and you claim them back on your tax credits, it'll be over the course of 2 years. So, for example, if you are claiming tax credits of €1,400, that'll be €700 received in tax credits in 1 year and €700 on the next year. They're calling for it to be refunded over the course of 1 year, which means that consumers will actually feel the benefit much more quicker and probably will be more incentivised to actually go, you know what, I will see this money next year.
Brilliant. And then what are the chances of the scheme being extended?
So we have contacted the department. They're not commenting at the moment because, it's summer season and everything like that. But, I mean, there is optimism that it could be extended. It's worked very well for the Revenue Commission. It rewards individuals and contractors that are very transparent about their taxes. It's brought many plumbers and electricians out of what was considered a grey economy, but it also rewards compliant homeowners, as they have to be on the Revenue's local property tax register to claim the tax benefit. So really, it's really rewarding those that are tax compliant. Look, we can't say whether it's definitely going to be extended or not. There is hopefulness that it will be extended. If it's not, we would really say to consumers that are planning on doing works to their home to try and get it done before Christmas so that you can feel these tax benefits.
Thanks very much for summing that up, Ciara. For more details, check out this week's Country Living.
The Irish Farmers Journal podcast, online at farmersjournal.ie, on the Irish Farmers Journal app and on iTunes every Thursday. Brought to you by Ornua, the home of Irish dairy.